You are listening to the Small Town Big Talk Show, the weekly podcast for small town people with big dreams and ideas. I'm your host, Rebecca Undum, and each week we'll cover a topic meant to inspire, encourage, and empower you to live big in your small town. Although it has its challenges, nothing beats small town living, and we're committed to sharing the best of what's working in the communities we serve. So enjoy this episode, and we hope it helps you to bloom where you've been planted. My guest on today's episode is Elizabeth Shipstead. Elizabeth is a farm wife, a mama, and a friend, but she's the founder of the Rural Sisterhood, which is a place to support, encourage, and create community and connection for rural women in agriculture. It's both a blog, a Facebook page, and then they have a really high quality, really connected group of women in a Facebook group. And Elizabeth and I sit down today to talk about how she started the Rural Sisterhood. And the coolest part about it, it was really born out of her own need. And that's something that every single one of us can take away wherever we live in our own small towns, that maybe we have an answer to the problems that we face. And you're going to love listening to her share her struggles, the journey that she's been on, and there's a lot that we can take away from listening to her story. So without further ado, enjoy this chat with my friend Elizabeth. Well, welcome, Elizabeth, to the show. So excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, you have quite, I don't want to call it a following, because I don't think that that's how you, I'm guessing that's not how you even perceive what's going on with your group in Facebook, but you have gathered quite a group of women to you, and your Facebook group is called the Rural Sisterhood. Yes. And you and I, we met at a conference in Montana. Is that right? Is that where we first crossed paths? Okay.
Yes.
But since then, I have watched the genuine connection and love and support of the women that are in that Facebook group. And so I just thought it would be really fun to have you on and talk a little bit about, you know, where that came from, how it started for you, what it's meant for you. And, you know, just encourage people, if the people listening fit the group, of course, I'm sure you'll welcome them with open arms. But I think it also is a really cool example of how we can create the connection that we so desperately need. A lot of us in rural communities or small towns, we maybe don't always feel, I don't want to say we don't feel supported, but sometimes I think we forget that there is a big wide world out there, and those people can be gathered to us, right? And a Facebook group is a great way to do it. So with all of that, tell us how you started, tell us everything, and we'll just have a fun conversation about it because I think it's beautiful.
Well, wonderful. Thank you again for having me. And this is gathering a community of rural sisters is really something that I'm passionate about. You know, it really started from a place of my own need. And I always start everything by saying, you know, I'm the farm wife, the mama, and the friend behind the Rural Sisterhood. And like you said, I don't really feel like it's a following, because I want it to feel like community. I want there to be genuine connections. And I would say that this whole process started in about 2014. I was 4 years into being a farm wife. I was raised in a rural community around agriculture, but we weren't in agriculture. Okay. And so I learned to value it, but I didn't know like the ins and outs of what it really took.
Right.
And so 4 years into being a farm wife, feel, you know, seasonally single, exhausted mama of littles. Well, we have, obviously, but at the time, 2 little girls. And I was trying to be involved on the farm, trying to take care of our home, keep our little ones alive, you know, all of those wonderful things.
Right.
And then working in town part-time. And I just realized that I was feeling more and more overwhelmed and just feeling isolated and lonely. And then on top of it, trying to support an exhausted, stressed, single farm-minded hubby. On top of it all, you know, I just was like, it was rough. And so I started sharing. And now where we live outside of, Glasgow is probably the easiest town, so that your listeners know we're in the far northeastern corner of Montana.
Okay,
and
right.
Glasgow is about 20 miles from us, somewhere in there. And the closest Walmart is about 2.5 hours away. That's actually in Dickinson, North Dakota, or not Dickinson, Williston, I'm sorry. And
Williston is your biggest community, Elizabeth? Your closest big community?
Yes, that's about 2.5 hours away. So, and yeah, I mean, if indication of size of, using Walmart.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. So that's our closest bigger city. And then from there, it's probably Billings, which is 5 hours from us, or Regina. Sometimes it's closer to go into Canada.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're really up north. I didn't actually know exactly where you live, so that's perfectly for me, of course. But I kind of know the area. But that is rural. I mean, you are, to be 2.5 hours. And this is the thing that I think is so interesting is that, rural and small town mean very different things to all sorts of people, right? It really is it really is quite subjective. But I think by anybody's accounts, being that far from even a Walmart, you are quite rural. And not necessarily that you're isolated, but I think being that rural lends itself to isolation easier.
Yes, it does. It does. And, even with friends in town, most of the time what I was finding is they were very willing to meet up and they wanted to connect to. But, on those like, honey, I need a God knows what, piece of art for this equipment. Can you run into town? Those were the times that I could connect with friends in town, but they couldn't always connect. And it was always spur of the moment. There was church, but even church wasn't consistent when we're out in the field, trying to get those last how many acres in and harvested. There were times where I couldn't even count on church, as, okay, well, I'll at least see them at church,
Right.
And so it's really this challenge of, I need to invest. I need to figure out how to put time in. And I also, the other piece was my friends, bless them, that are in and out of agriculture, but especially those out of agriculture, they really try to understand. But it is really hard for somebody outside of agriculture that doesn't live it every day to understand, like, hey, when you invite me to coffee, you might have to invite me like 4 times.
Right.
And that was one of the experiences that I had was trying to simply meet up with this acquaintance of mine. And I don't know what happened the first time. Something came up and I had to cancel on her. I'm really sorry. Hubby just came in and said, cows are out. I'm really sorry. I can't leave right now. Okay. So, what's the next time? Okay, well, we'll set it up for this next time. And so the second time I was like, okay, I'm going to make this. And then God knows what came up again. And by the 4th time, I was so embarrassed. I felt so flaky. I was like, enough. I can't. This is awful. I can't do this to a friend,
Right.
And unfortunately, I had probably picked the worst time of the year to try to connect with her. I should have probably just said, I'll see you during the dead of winter.
Right. Or it almost is like, can you come out here and ride along in my vehicle, like wherever I have to go? Yeah, I can really appreciate this. There's a couple things, and hopefully I won't get you off your entire train of thought, Elizabeth, but there's 2 things that you've said that I think are so interesting. The first is that you started this Facebook group from your own place of need. I think that is so important for people to really hear because, again, I think a lot of times we have to create the answers to the challenges that we're facing because otherwise we sit around waiting for somebody else to do it. And oftentimes we have the ability to solve our own problems or, meet our own challenges, but we just, sometimes we think, well, maybe somebody else will. But I love that you just took the initiative and did it. So that was one thing I wanted to just comment on.
Sure.
Secondly, I'm really so happy to be talking to you because when I came to Montana and I spoke at the conference that you were at, I remember starting out and saying, and I don't know if you remember this, that I feel like there are so many divisions among women that I am a farmer's wife, but I'm not actively involved in the farm. We have a very different farming operation. It's a family farm, but we also farm with non-family. Okay.
Right.
So there isn't a place for me to be involved in the daily operations of the farm.
Sure.
But I am in it. Like whether
Right.
we are actively, like you said, running for parts, they have people that run for parts. I don't run for parts for my husband. And
Sure.
if I go out and I'm in a combine or I trucked with him a little bit this fall, like that's so I can connect with him. Otherwise
Right.
I wouldn't be out there at all.
Yes.
So I think what you're speaking about though, is the specific challenges of being kind of like you actually are all in the farm. And that does look different from my experience. And I guess I don't wish it would be different. I think it's really important because you are saying, where are the women that are immersed in agriculture and feel kind of lonely, misunderstood, and you need somebody that gets it? That's a beautiful thing. And I'm in your Facebook group, and I'm not overly active only because of that reason, right? Like I'm not out in it every single day, but I've never felt excluded from your group for that reason. So I would love to just get your take on that. Do you feel like there are weird divisions among the women that are involved? Like you're not really in it if you're not doing the things that we kind of just talked about. Do you feel that at all?
Sometimes. I think that, let me back up just a little bit. So one of the things, when I started this, it was really from a place of being willing to be vulnerable and share the challenges that I was going through.
Yep.
And what I found is that when I was willing to put myself out there and say, this is tough, there were women that said, either they were saying, I've been there, or they're like, I'm here too.
Right.
This is rough. And so, when I created the Facebook group specifically, that was really important for me. When there's a lot of other groups out there, wonderful groups, I might add, that are valuable women in ag groups. But what I found was that oftentimes people became divided because, well, I homestead. And but that's not farming, as somebody might say that, but that's not farming. Well, I ranch. My income isn't mostly from a crop I raise. It's from cows, so I ranch, I consider myself a farmer, but I don't really consider myself a farmer. I consider myself a farm wife, or all these all these different little pieces to it.
Right.
But the piece that was really important in this community, and this is probably the piece that I would tell that applies to any group of women, any community, is that you have to have a place where you can be vulnerable. And that vulnerability and that willing to share and meet each other wherever you are, whether there's a difference or not, where in how you define yourself or not, is what's important. And so I started gathering women for this community, and I just said, hey, I want to create this Facebook group, but I want it to be different. I want it to understand the role of agriculture, but I want it to be a place that's you can be very vulnerable and it's supportive and encouraging. Are we going to tell the truth to each other? Absolutely. But we are always, 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 always going to do it in love. And we're not going to allow our words to alienate each other. And so that is really, one of the guidelines that it was founded upon. And that has meant across time that there has been a few women who we had to ask to leave. That was really, really, really hard. I think it was actually you who said that time that I had the opportunity to meet you in person. I think you were talking about the nest. Was that you?
That was me.
You have to protect that. And that's one of the reasons why that community has stayed small, is that we really wanted to preserve that nest idea. And, I don't walk into the grocery store and I'm not as vulnerable with, an acquaintance in town as I might be with a really good friend, a trusted friend, or even in this community.
Right.
So, that is a real important piece of that. I love Brene Brown, and there's a couple of other quotes. This one actually is from Sally Clarkson that I really love. And she says, when we enter a community of other caring women, we will find ourselves stronger than we ever were on our own.
Yeah, I love that.
I do too. I really love that. And it speaks to that community and the community that I seek for myself as well. And then that idea of vulnerability, Brene Brown says, vulnerability sounds like truth and feels like courage. Truth and courage aren't always comfortable, but they're never weakness. Right. And so, the way we respond to people, I think either, lifts them up and encourages that courage that it took for them to share, or we're responding as if they're being weak or something, and we definitely don't want to do that, right?
So I love Brene Brown as well. Like, I think that I don't really know people that don't love her. I don't know what kind of person would not love her, but when I think about small towns where probably the majority of your sisters live, right? Because they're all in agriculture in some way, shape, or form, kind of like we've discussed. We tend to be in rural places where there's open acres to either ranch or farm. And I really find, and I don't know if you have found this, but how big is the town you live in, by the way, that you would consider your actual zip code?
Oh, my actual zip code, that town is pretty doggone tiny. Definitely less than 1,000.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just kind of point of reference. So my community is 1,800. We're under 2,000 people. And I think that what you are speaking about, what we're talking about, it's so interesting to me. It's such an interesting dichotomy that I feel like I see in small towns where there's not a lot of us. And so by that very fact, you would think we know each other better, right?
Right.
In some respects we do, but I also think that amount of intimacy sometimes keeps us from being as real and vulnerable and honest as we ought to be.
True.
Shouldn't say ought, I should say as we could be. Because I really believe too that having a place, you actually said that you have to have a place where you can be vulnerable. That was something that you just said a couple moments ago. Yeah. That's what leads to connection, right? We can't actually connect with people if we're not being real and honest about sometimes the difficulty. I think too that people sometimes confuse vulnerability with spilling your guts about everything that's hard. Vulnerability can just be admitting that you're super joyful about something as well. Vulnerability is just honesty, right? And being willing to say it out loud. Have you found that to be true? That it's strange that in small towns sometimes we aren't as honest, maybe like you said, with the people that are walking the streets with us, but sometimes we can find it in these curated groups that were designed for that very thing. Have you found that to be true?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. I think that small towns are amazing. They really are. I wouldn't choose to live anywhere else. I love living rurally. But one of the things that I see is kind of a cliquey type thing that happens. And I think you can see it online. I think you can see it actually in your neighborhood, as well. And it's kind of well, we've been here forever or whatever. And so, these are our friends. And although that's okay, they probably can be vulnerable with those people, being open to new ideas or people coming in from the outside and not keeping that community so close and clique-like is really important too. And so there really has to be a balance there. Yeah, I don't know. Have you noticed the cliquey type thing in small town? I think that's a piece of that, not willing to be totally vulnerable.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I'm back in the community where I was raised. So I call myself a returner, right? I'm somebody that flew the coop and then came back. I think the challenges that I feel like I've had kind of re-assimilating into my community are different than somebody that's like a transplant that's new to the community and that like married in, which is terrible. It's not the only way people land here, but a lot of times in small towns, you marry a farmer, right? Maybe you aren't from that community and then you end up there. And I definitely think that that's one of our biggest challenges in small towns is how do we, that this whole thing, like small towns are so friendly. I've heard over and over through the conversations I've had, that's not most people's experience when they're transplanting there. And so, I definitely think it's a challenge. And like you said, I mean, it's perfectly natural for people to click up to a degree, right? Like we become friends with the people we're friends with. But I think the bigger question isn't so much about opening. You don't have to open yourself up so that you're best friends with everybody, but are you welcoming and are you open? Yes. Like you just said, being open to new ideas and really open to new people coming in is a really important thing that I think probably every small town could be better at.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's this idea too of like, the whole best friend, the elementary school, middle school best friend thing. I think it's really important to have friends that can be held close and best friend status. But I think also that can so limit your circle of friends, your thoughts, I don't know. I think that you have to almost let go of that best friend idea and recognize that friendship is going to look different depending on where you are in life, and your community around you is going to look different, where you are in life as well. Right. And that's okay. You don't have to have just these two best friends and they go through life with you as best friends. I mean, that does happen, but it's okay if friends come and go and maybe they don't come back. Who knows? But I think being open to, and knowing what is it that I need from friendship right now? What is it that I can give right now to a friendship?
Right. I think that's a beautiful thing to remind, especially women about, because I think I really do believe that all of us, we hold on to these tight ideas and we hold them tightly. These ideas of either once was, what we think should be with friendships. We sometimes don't let them evolve like they naturally are trying to, and we keep trying to make it and force it. And I do think that that's something really important to think about, that friendships, we evolve, we grow. Well, ideally, I really believe that if we're not growing, we're dying. That's kind of one of my mantras, like growing at least, changing, thinking differently. And you can't grow and be challenged to think differently if you only surround yourself with the same two people your entire life. I think that was what, this limiting of your circle of friends, kind of your influence, you create an echo chamber, right? Yeah. Where everything, you only are surrounded by people that think exactly like you do. And that isn't, for me anyway, that's not a meaningful way to live. I like being challenged by people that think differently. I don't feel like my values, my morals, my compass, none of that feels threatened, just because we're being challenged to think differently about things.
You have to be so careful, to not go stagnant, but not lose yourself either.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I think one of the things when going back to the nest, when we talked about that, when we were actually physically together, I've shared that you don't have to be vulnerable with everybody. Like that, to me, that can be a very small group of people.
Right.
But at the same time, being able to like hold space for different viewpoints and hear different points of view, I think is just so important. And it isn't something I don't know that we're especially just naturally good at in small towns.
Right.
It's scary to be the person standing on the outside of what feels like the majority when you're in a small community.
Yes. I can see why people in small communities are so cautious about letting, don't shoot me now. I always say that, but I actually am originally from California. I wasn't born and raised here.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, I married in. Moved to Montana after college and met my husband. And then we moved back to where we are now to farm. And so, I went through that. The first few months of being in Montana, I had a California license plate, and you should have seen the dirty looks I got. But because of where I am from in California, we're just 45 minutes south of the Oregon border. So way the heck up there. I got it. I knew why people looked at Californians that way, because Southern California had done the same thing to us in Northern California, as now is happening in like the western side of Montana. And driving up prices, the small town feel is changing,
Yeah, right.
And I get that people want to preserve it, and it absolutely should be preserved. And so there, I get it. It's kind of dangerous to open your circle depending on how you look at that. You could see that as kind of like, now, wait a second, our way of life is being threatened. Things are changing, and we're not sure that this is the way we want them to change.
Right. Right.
But yet, if we don't open our arms to people coming in and say, look, this is why it's important to us, and on a personal level, this is why we want to keep it this way, then they're not going to know. And so I think that's the same in agriculture as well, is that, agriculture has to change or else it won't continue. But on the other hand, we don't want to change so much that it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but yet we have to be willing to open and be vulnerable, open up our lives and risk problems to be able to share, why is this important? Why is this 100-year-old farm? Why has it lasted? Why is this important to us? Why, and same with small towns as well. But you can't do that if you're not kind to people coming in.
No, exactly. Well, and I think the other thing you're speaking to here somewhat is that we have to not control the narrative, but be a part of it. Right. Otherwise, people that don't know are telling the story of whether it's agriculture. I mean, agriculture is a really great example of that, I think, where there's a lot of misinformation about agriculture in mainstream media, like certainly. And if as producers, whether it's ranching or it's farming, to take an active role in telling your story, and it's your story to tell, and again, I understand the fear of opening yourself up to that. And yet, like you said, there's a real danger that it'll change so much from outside and kind of external factors because we never stepped up to say, this is what's really happening. This is what we really need. And I think small towns are exactly the same way.
Yes, I agree. I think there's this piece of identity too, whether you're in agriculture or you're in a small town. I think there's a close link of identity to it. Mm-hmm. And, it's something that has been really heavy on my heart, especially for agriculture, is that, we really have this mindset that, we're farmers first, or we're ranchers first, or you hear the quote, the farm comes first. And it's wonderful to be that invested, but I think we have to be careful about where or in what or whom our identity is rooted in. And if your identity is so wrapped up into something that can be fleeting, and honestly, farming, we're not promised tomorrow. Ranching, we're not promised tomorrow. We're never promised tomorrow, really. And so, when we have that mindset of we're a farmer first before anything else, and we don't know who we are as a person, and we're not rooted in something that is lasting, then when it does get shooken up, or we have a rough year, or, people come into our small community, we can take that so personally that we then respond in a really unkind way, or we can be shaken to our core and lose ourselves to some extent. And that's part of what worries me so much about our agricultural culture and communities with the rise in suicide.
Right.
And I think our identity and what we hold so close as who we are, is there's something to that.
I totally agree. You're speaking some things over this whole conversation that I've definitely given thought to myself, outside of agriculture. But I've said this before, that to friends that have needed to hear it in the moment when they're struggling, that
Sure.
our value doesn't come from the things that we do. Like
Right.
we actually have inherent value because of who we are. And I think that's some of what you're talking about, is uncoupling the roles that we play from our only source of identity. And some of those things are very hard. It's very hard to do that with farming. Certainly is one of them, especially if, my father would be a great example of this. He's a 4th generation farmer. It is such a part of who that man is.
Right.
But like you said, if we do run the danger, if we can't see or have no perception of our own value outside of that one thing, if something happens to that one thing, we completely crumble as people. And I think that's a danger with parenting.
Yes.
And again, like, talk about something, could there be something more primal than being a mom, right? Like everything that we even physically go through to bring children into the world, for those of us that are blessed to actually carry our own children, it's just a completely primal thing. But again, that's not the only value I offer this world. I'm a person. I was a person prior to that, right? I think that's a really important thing for all of us to think about. And I love the way that you brought it up. It creates a potential danger for us if we're not careful.
Yes. Yep. I completely agree. And then, that leads perfectly into like self-care, that conversation about self-care. I think self-care there's this like, oh, well, I'm going to go run a bubble bath and et cetera, et cetera. And, I'm going to have a piece of chocolate. But, in reality, self-care really can be, I have to go pay the bills now.
Yeah, right.
I'm going to put everything else aside and I'm going to do the hard work. And some of that hard work is figuring out, what is my identity rooted in? Who is my identity rooted in? And growing, that not getting stagnant part, that's a big part of self-care right there.
Yeah, totally agree. So what role has the Rural Sisterhood Facebook group played in your not just your self-care, but your own development as a person? You've been doing it now. You're going on your 6th year.
Yes. Yeah. As I look back, I can see places that I've grown alongside these women. It brings a smile to my face just to even think of them, because it really has created a place where, even though, I'm one of the admins or whatever in the group, and I may have started it, it still has been this place where I've been sick for the last week. And so I can step away and know that it still continues, and that the guidelines that were created by all of us, will continue. And so as I grow and change, and the group kind of grows and changes, and, and sometimes that means, I kind of step away from it for a bit, but know that the mission is still continuing. And also, what I have found probably most challenging is to keep on that goal of creating that community and making sure that it's fostering that vulnerability, but that's going to continue to change and grow as we all change and grow. And so reminding myself of that, of remember, what it looks like today might not be the same as it looks like in a year, but that doesn't mean that the group isn't, unnecessary or something like that.
Right.
But allowing that growth to really happen across time, reevaluating every so often, and engaging the community, engaging the people that I hold dear in that conversation with me has really been important for that as well.
Yeah. Well, I think what you've created, you've carved out a beautiful little pocket of the internet for yourself and for the other women. And I just think there's so much that people can take away from this, because I get it. Social media on the whole can really be a place where a lot of damage is done to people, I think, unfortunately. And I think a lot of times we bring it on ourselves by what we're choosing to engage with versus like, this is kind of almost a 2020, and I wouldn't call it a resolution. It's more of a commitment that I'm trying to, or an intention that I'm trying to bring to my life, is to really stop engaging in the things that as soon as I see them, I somehow feel like I'm not doing things right. If that makes sense. Like, I suddenly feel like I don't have it 100% together, because I totally don't, Elizabeth. Like, yeah, me too. I mean, like, who has it all together? But I think we all need to take control and be intentional and mindful about the influence that certain things really can have on us. And we maybe aren't even seeing it or thinking about it in the moment, but you are showing everybody, even in any small town, like there might be people listening that have that kind of a need, that basic need that's not being met somehow through their day-to-day life. Maybe they're isolated, maybe they're new to town, maybe who knows what the situation is, but you're basically showing people what's possible to create for yourself. It's actually a place where you are edified by other women, and that's possible. Even as yucky as social media can be, it is possible to find and create and cultivate these real, genuine connections. And it's just a beautiful thing that you've created for yourself. Well, in it.
Thank you. But I really cannot take full credit for it, because really it's been the women who have joined me in that vision. They're the ones really that continue it as well. I'm there and I'm, an admin in that group, but it's really not just me. It's the other women as well that have said, this is important to me too. And so that's been really encouraging, that it's like, okay, I'm not alone in the struggles that I face. And I'm not alone in being somebody who wants to make sure that that there is that place there and available for ourselves and for other women. So,
you know what I think is really powerful about what you just said is that, and I hope people really listen to this, that I believe anyway, that there is almost not a single thing that any one of us is going through that it is unique to us. We're never actually as alone as we feel when we're in the depth of the pain or the discomfort or the difficulty. And I just think if we want to create a place of connection like what you've created, it is simply a matter of saying, I have friends that we call it planting a flag, right? Like, what would your flag, what would it say? What would you want people to rally around? What would make you feel seen, heard, loved, valued? And imagine that flag being planted in your front yard. A bunch of people won't care about what's on your flag. And that's but more than likely there's at least one other person in the big wide world, especially on, social media, that needs what you need and wants to be a part of what you are trying to create. So we get caught up in the vanity of how many people there are. And you actually referenced this earlier, that your Facebook group is still relatively small. That's all that actually matters. It's about how the people in the group connect, not how many of them are there.
Yeah. Yes. And there, when you're in the online business, blogging, social media world, numbers can get really important, and that Facebook page number of likes and how many are in your community or all of those things. And I've had to really remind myself that no, if there's just one other woman that connects with something that I said today on my Facebook page, or that feels heard or feels encouraged when they come into that community and share what's going on or ask for help or something like that, that's what's important. It's not the total number. We had a conversation, I don't know, it was probably close to the beginning of, probably within the first year or two, there was a big conversation that happened about, are we going to keep this community Are we going to set it to public? Are we going to set it to closed? Are we going to set it to secret? And, there was a little part of me that was like, shoot, if we set it to closed, nobody's going to be able to find it as easily. And, I want people to be able to join us. But as we had that discussion, what really became important was that being able to be vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And so many of them said, what will help me be the most vulnerable is knowing that not just anybody can request to become a member, but that, if it's secret, they're vetted, they're come through my blog, and then I talk with them, and I actually have to friend them the way Facebook works, but that's fine. Friend them, I talk with them a little bit and then bring them into the group, or else it's a friend of a friend. So that we had to have that conversation of like, what's the most important here is getting it out to as many people as loud as we can, as quickly as we can. Is that what's important? Or is it the quality? And so that's what we decided. And it will most likely continue to be that, as long as it's there, because that quality piece was really important.
Well, I think you're again speaking to kind of what we talked about a little bit ago, that this is like the trap of all of this stuff. Like you said, if you're in kind of the online world in any way, shape, or form, it can really feel like the only way to make a difference or to make an impact is to have these like massive numbers. And that just isn't true. And so I think it's important, again, for all of us to stop, slow down, and think, what do I actually care about? What am I trying to accomplish? What is the purpose of this? What are we, constant, and like you said, constantly reevaluating. Am I still doing the work that I want to do? Because good work can be done with one person. You can impact one person. That work is good.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's, again, it's just such a beautiful example of what I really believe is true, that we can create the things that we need, even if we're in the smallest of small towns, and it sometimes feels like we're limited in some way. Sure. Amazing opportunity to connect with people all over the place really takes that away. And the Rural Sisterhood is a great example of that. So of course we want people listening. What is the best way for them to get information about the group if they really feel connected to what we've talked about?
Sure. Well, they can connect with me through the blog, specifically if they want to get into the group or find out more about the group. It's www.theruralsisterhood.com. And if you scroll down on that first page that you come to, you'll find that you can find out more about the community there. And I'll be the one to message you back and all of those pieces. So they can do that, or they can always email me. My email is theruralsisterhood at gmail.com, and we can visit that way, or you can find me on Facebook.
Perfect. And we'll make sure too, Elizabeth, that we link to all of these things in the show notes so people can easily find it when this episode goes live. I just want to thank you again for taking the time to share with us kind of how this all started. I love to talk to people like you that are, and you're doing really good work. And I don't care how many people follow you. That's not the point at all. It's what you've created and the meaning, like the significance of what it is that you created for the women that are there. You're very, very inspirational. So the last question that I always ask, or try to ask every single guest, is, what does living big in a small town mean to you, Elizabeth?
I think we probably have covered it. Being able to be vulnerable, to be involved, but be really mindful of what's important, who you are, and to live big within that, to not get sucked in by what somebody else is doing, what's important, what looks good, what somebody else's highlight reel looks like, and to create community where you can be vulnerable, but isn't completely cut off as well.
Right.
So,
well, thank you. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for joining us today.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Small Town Big Talk Show. If you enjoyed today's show, we invite you to subscribe on Stitcher, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, and we'd love for you to leave us a 5-star review. The more reviews we get, the easier it will be for other small town friends to find us. We encourage you to keep on living big in your small town, because the size of your life is not determined by your zip code.